The Indian in the Cupboard. I can still remember sitting cross-legged in a circle with my friends as my second grade teacher, Mrs. Gamick, read us the story of a young boy and his magical cupboard with the ability to bring toys to life. I grew up playing with action figures and Bionicles, acting out my favorite storylines and creating my own worlds. So the thought of being able to talk and learn from the very things that I spent so much time sharing these worlds with was something that hit close to home. It was also the first time that I could remember seeing a native person in film, or I guess a native action figure transfused in the soul of an Iroquois warrior from the 18th century transported into our present world. And while I'm sure that this part of the story went far above my head, I do wonder what my second grade self would have thought about native people, just purely based off of what I had heard, and whether or not this had some sort of impact on how I viewed native culture moving forward. Obviously, I wouldn't have thought that native people were 3 inches tall and came from cupboards, but it has to have made some impression on me, as I can still remember the story almost 16 years later. But what could it be? And could I have walked away with any stereotypes or misrepresentations? A part of the story that I can distinctly remember feeling awed about was Little Bear's house that he was able to build using only the resources around him, making do with what nature provided. Some of my favorite memories as a kid were spent on the nature trail or the loose line, building secret forts with my best friend. So the idea that I would have found this is cool isn't that surprising when I look back on it. But what is surprising to me is that it's probably where I first was introduced to the idea that native people are somehow more spiritually connected to nature. I was convinced that it had to be Little Bear's connection with nature that allowed him to create something as amazing as the longhouse that Mrs. Gamick described. This idea of a spiritual connection would then be hammered into my brain as I grew up, watching major films like Pocahontas and Dancing with Wolves and even Avatar. And what I've been told was a part of a culture was really just a misrepresentation of what Hollywood and our colonial society wanted us to see. The reality is that everyone can become connected with nature. You don't need to be some certain race in order to feel an affinity with the earth. And while I'm glad that I can recognize this misrepresentation now, it once again takes me back to the reading circle around Mrs. Gamick, and it leaves me wondering if this book left similar impressions on my classmates, and how those representations and impressions may have shaped them today.